Hey, it's Mike here, and today, by popular request, The Magic Pill. It is a Netflix documentary that espouses a high-meat, high-animal-fat keto diet as the magic pill that heals everything. It talks about how all carbs are the devil and how saturated fat is a health food, and the drift you'll probably get from this documentary is that a keto diet heals everything from cancer to autism. So we're going to look at some very pertinent information to this diet that the documentary completely left out. We're going to look at a ton of studies that you will not see in this documentary and take a look at the experts and their claims. All right, let's go. Quick recap, keto or ketosis is a state where the body is deprived of carbohydrates, which it preferentially burns, which is why most of the world isn't in ketosis, and then it switches over to ketone bodies, which are made from fat. So fat energy converted into ketones to burn. The movie starts by framing the obvious, that most people do not eat a healthy diet, and then they follow a few individuals as they throw out all of their extremely horrible processed foods and carbs in general and adopt a super high-fat keto diet. Honestly, the best way to become familiar with this documentary is to just watch the trailer. Let's watch the trailer real quick. It's the real one, I swear.
Do you like slathering lard on raw broccoli? Watch The Magic Pill, the Netflix documentary that uses suggestibility and anecdotes to convince you that a keto diet will cure everything. Cancer? Cured. Autism? Cured. Being a shill that uses industry-funded studies? Sorry, not that, Nina. Come with us as we rewrite history to convince you that humans were always in ketosis and never ate any carbs. Careful, Katumbu, that fruit will make your tummy poochy. Learn why keto is the magic pill as we conveniently ignore a mountain of research of adverse effects that was compiled by a Paleo PhD researcher such as enlarged hearts, kidney stones, acute pancreatitis, losing your period, heart attacks, and dying. Yes, 5 studies on dying. But go keto! Watch on Netflix now and kiss carbs goodbye.
After they have lulled you into a sweet state of suggestibility, they put forth a few dietary suggestions. Eat whole foods and avoid processed foods. Yes, and duh, this is where I agree, and I think everybody agrees with the documentary. However, it's kind of interesting how you see them slathering coconut oil and lard on broccoli and stuff like that. Those are not whole foods. I don't understand.
So we're going to get lard all over our hands.
Avoid legumes? What? This study found that it was the #1 dietary predictor of elderly survival. Why would you ever avoid them? Avoid dairy? Yeah, I'm on board with that. Eggs, they're all about eggs, and eggs do spike your cholesterol, and I always have to mention that one viewer I had that was on a keto diet and his cholesterol was 440. He then went on a vegan diet and went down to 160. We'll cover all the heart stuff in a bit, and of course they say pastured animals. We'll also cover that in a second, and they want you to do the bone broths and organ meats. I have a video on bone broths, you can watch that. There's so many myths around bone broth, and even the organic ones have unhealthy levels of lead. Okay, now that you have a little bit of a background on the film's recommendation, I want to rewind a little bit because I previously did a video on keto diets, and the response from the keto community was super concerning. Because I'm vegan and I knew keto people would probably want to ignore me, I made the whole video centered around Paleo Mom's cautions against a keto diet. She is not a vegan, she eats a high-meat, low-carb diet, and is a PhD nutritional researcher. Yet keto people ignored all of these things, and these are compiled from a trove of research that we have over decades on children who were put on a keto diet for epilepsy. And in the film, we have a dad with his daughter who has autism and epilepsy, and here he is talking about medication.
The lump in my throat as I was reading. The side effects, man, I mean, may cause harm to yourself or others, may have rashy, irritated skin, may cause sleeplessness.
How about this list of side effects? Again, compiled by someone who was not vegan. And if there's anything that you should see after that documentary, it is this list. Let's zip through it really quickly. We have digestive disturbances, inflammation, hair loss, kidney stones. In one study, 5% of the children had kidney stones. A quick comparison of the normal rate of kidney stones in children shows that this is 3,000 times higher than the normal rate. We have impaired cognition and nutritional deficiencies. We have other kidney issues such as renal tubular acidosis, which is likely from all of the ketones, which, yes, are acids. We have poor growth and bone issues likely from the prolonged acidity of ketones. And keto people will tell you that, no, you don't need to worry about the acidity here. It's just diabetics and their ketoacidosis. Totally different. No, that is just a smokescreen they throw up. This prolonged acidity can have a negative effect on you, clearly. Yes, our body has the ability to buffer the acidity of our blood, but that can become overloaded, maybe after a prolonged unnatural diet where we are mimicking starvation by clamping our carb intake at around 5 or 10%, because that's what happens in nature. And some keto proponents sort of admit this, from Lyle McDonald's book on keto diets. When you go keto, the blood pH temporarily decreases and then normalizes after a few days, but, quote, the buffering capacity of the blood is decreased. That is not good. Back to our list of adverse effects. Why else would a 9-year-old who died of acute pancreatitis and heart attack on a keto diet have prolonged acidosis? They were not diabetic. The authors of that study then sound the warning bell of keto diets, a warning that definitely does not make it into the documentary in the slightest. There's also cardiomyopathy or enlarged hearts. One study found that 15% of the children put on a keto diet had enlarged hearts. To emphasize that it was the diet, one child with severe dilated cardiomyopathy was taken off the diet and they normalized. The keto community continues to deny the risk of cardiomyopathy, and these people are definitely not getting their hearts scanned, and most of them probably don't even know that it's a risk. Another one is higher cholesterol, in particular raised LDL, which is even echoed by Healthline, a low-carb site trying to make keto look good. Yes, heart attacks are on the list of adverse effects, and finally, so is death. And just because Paleo Mom knew how in denial the keto community tends to be, she decided to cite 5 papers backing that up. While we're on the topic of mortality, this meta-analysis found that low-carb diets were associated with a 30% increase in all-cause mortality, and there's no reason to believe that a keto diet varies from these other low-carb diets enough to change that, and by contrast, vegans in epidemiological studies were shown to have 15% lower mortality. So, big difference there. And this documentary is compared to What the Health a lot because there are structural similarities, but this is what fundamentally makes the two diets different. One, the best science shows that it's probably going to increase your mortality, and the other shows that that diet is going to decrease your mortality, whether you think they're both exaggerating or not. Final point by Paleo Mom, she says that a keto diet has inherent risks that are backed by science and that this is not a part of the community discussion around keto diets, and this documentary, once again, super failed to mention any of these. The documentary is like, oh, you might get a little tummy ache at first, but the diet is completely perfect in every other way. But there's a reason the documentary starts with a giant disclaimer saying that these are anecdotes and these results probably won't happen to you. In other words, we're about to make ridiculous claims and you can't sue us. Okay, now let's take a closer look at the claims and anecdotes of the movie, going back to the little girl with autism. She literally starts out with one of the worst diets on the planet. She has a diet centered around chicken nuggets, Doritos, and goldfish.
Those are her food preferences. SpaghettiOs, chicken nuggets, goldfish.
Goldfish is a normal.
Doritos.
She goes on a keto diet, and of course, rainbows come out, and everything is perfect. And of course, she ditched all processed foods. That's gonna have a major improvement. Removing processed foods and going keto is like quitting drugs, but then snorting a line of lead paint dust. Or you can just give up drugs. You don't need to clog your arteries harder with animal fat to reap the benefits of removing processed foods. And I know the film has convinced you that these are not artery clogging foods. We'll cover that in a bit. And you might come away from this thinking that, oh my gosh, a keto diet cures autism. There is no reason to believe that ketosis is going to cure autism. We have a lot of reasons to believe that processed foods exacerbate autism. All right, next anecdote, let's talk about cancer. There's this woman who went on a keto diet and massively improved the condition of her cancer. And the reasoning for this is that cancer has an Achilles heel. It's that it needs sugar to grow. The idea is that since you aren't eating carbs on a keto diet, therefore your blood sugar is gonna be really low and you're gonna starve cancer. And they point to this study, which is really just theoretical. And obviously lower blood sugar is gonna be better for cancer. That is not the question here. The question is, why does somebody like Dr. Sean Baker, who eats an all-meat diet and is in ketosis, have diabetic fasting glucose, diabetic blood sugar levels? Super high, super cancer feeding. But the interesting part here is that vegans lower their blood sugar more than people on a keto diet, judging from some of the studies. From this keto study, a keto diet didn't necessarily keep blood sugar lowered, as you can tell by this chart. Now, in interest of showing both sides, this study, which was just on 2 people, did find that tumors were taking up 20% less sugar. However, it does not appear to be statistically significant, and we don't know if that actually affected tumor growth. In contrast, we have studies by Ornish on people put on plant-based diets where cancer growth was slowed by 8 times compared to the control group. And slowing cancer, that's pretty cool, but not as cool as killing it. From this study that put people on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks, they found that their blood was better at killing cancer than at the beginning. And in terms of sugar, from one of Neil Barnard's study, we saw a nearly 30% drop in blood sugar in fasting glucose, which is huge for cancer. So you can starve yourselves of carbs virtually completely and still possibly end up with higher blood sugar levels than people who are eating as many whole carbs as they want. It's also no wonder why the vegans were observed having 78% lower total risk of diabetes than their neighbors in the Adventist study. And another point, keto people love bacon and they love their red meat. So is somebody gonna start a keto group called like carcinogens for cancer? No, this is insane. Final point on cancer, a lot of people say, oh, the way that a keto diet actually works is that it suppresses your appetite so you don't overconsume calories. Well, that is not what you want when you're fighting cancer. It's important to keep weight on. And yeah, this documentary focuses on some diseases, but let's be honest, the real reason that the vast majority of people are doing keto is to lose weight. Many keto people boast that there is a magic fat burning quality to ketosis, that because you are burning fat, you're going to burn the fat stores on your body. Well, this study from the NIH is probably the best science that we have. They took people in a metabolic ward and they fed them the exact same amount of calories on a keto diet and on a higher carb diet. They verified that the keto group was in fact in ketosis, and the results were the keto diet lost in terms of fat loss. Quote, body fat loss slowed during the keto diet and coincided with increased protein utilization and loss of fat-free mass. Fat-free mass being muscle, bone, and organ weight, and in fact you have a decent amount of weight worth of glycogen which gets burned up as well, not fat. By contrast, looking to the Broad study, which I prefer to call the Broad study out of New Zealand, you can eat as many whole carbs as you want and still lose weight. It was an ad libitum, or eat as much as you want, whole food vegan diet, and the result was, quote, to the best of our knowledge, this research has achieved greater weight loss at 6 and 12 months than any other trial that does not limit energy intake or mandate exercise. And I don't have time to cover all of the anecdotal stories in this movie, but of course, if you're removing a ton of processed foods, you are gonna do better. It wasn't the ketosis. Now I want to get into the fat versus carbs situation here, and from some ladies in the kitchen.
At the time, it's fat-free. It has no fat in it.
Yeah, but what does it turn into once it goes into your system? Fat. But all of that sugar turns into fat.
You heard it. That's that Nobel Prize. Actually, as this study by Hellerstein mentions, if we actually track the carbs within our body and the fat within our body, we see that about 90% or more of the fat that is stored on our bodies was actually from fat we ate. An obvious note, they completely conflate refined carbs with whole carbs here in general. And we know from the Okinawans, who traditionally ate about 85% of their total calories from carbohydrates and had some of the lowest levels of diseases and the longest life on the planet, they were eating whole carbs, not refined sugar. All right, now let's look at how some of the experts misconstrued history, starting with Nora Gedgaudas.
More than 100,000 generations, not 100,000 years, but 100,000 generations on a largely meat and fat-based diet. We have the brains that we do because of the enormous amount of fat that we consume as a species throughout our evolutionary history.
Yes, our brain needs fat to be built, but it doesn't need as much as they make it out to need, and it runs on glucose preferably. How else would the Okinawans, who again ate 85% carbohydrates, build a brain and then have some of the lowest levels of dementia on the planet? And there are many anthropologists that would disagree with her notion. We have anthropologists like Karen Hardy and Nathaniel Dominy who say actually it was starches that grew our brains. We also have Dr. Perlmutter.
There's no question that the brain can burn glucose. What powers the brain far more efficiently in terms of its energy-producing components, called the mitochondria, is fat. Our brains thrive in a fat-burning environment.
It's funny how the brain prefers to burn glucose then. I don't know why that would be. And I don't want to spend too much time on Perlmutter. Then we have Dr. Davis.
I call wheat the perfect obesogen. Food perfectly crafted to make you fat.
And he basically demonizes grains, especially wheat, making the pretty outlandish claim that we have only been eating wheat for 0.5% of human history.
Wheat was added 10,000 years ago, which sounds like a long time because it predates the Egyptian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. but 10,000 years represents less than 0.5% of human race's time on.
Homo sapiens, or humans, have been around for about 200,000 years, and at 10,000 years of wheat farming, that's about 5% of history, so he's off there by a factor of 10. Most importantly, we have been eating the wild ancestors of wheat for way longer than agriculture has existed. In the fossilized plaque of Neanderthals, we can even find some wheat-related starch grains from 30 to 50,000 years ago. And in terms of grains in general, here is a study showing us eating grass seeds over 100,000 years ago. That's 50% of human history. Wrong. All this grain hating and legume hating is funny because it's actually the reason that most of us are alive today. If we had decided to just ditch all grains and just go grazing, we wouldn't have had the calories to build our society. From this USDA report, we already use 27% of our total land in the US for pasture, for grazing, and most of the meat we eat isn't even from animals that are put on pastures, like chickens. Can you imagine shifting all of our meat consumption to pastured animals and then doubling all of our meat consumption on a keto diet? I think it would be well over 100% of our land needs, including mountains and deserts. In contrast, from this study, a vegan diet requires about 1/8 of the land of an omnivorous diet. So when they're hating on monocropping and all that corn, it's important to note that the vast majority of it is being fed to animals. And producers of this documentary, you're definitely kidding yourself if you think the average person watching your documentary can afford to eat a ton of pasture-raised animal flesh. No, this is just going to result in an increase in consumption of factory-farmed meat. All right, now we're going to dive into the low-carb narrative, starting with Nina Teicholz. She's known for her book and her article in the British Medical Journal, which criticizes the dietary guidelines. And that was funded by a lobbying group which appears to have been birthed out of the worst food industries. That lobbying group is the Nutrition Coalition, and from The Atlantic. Before the Nutrition Coalition was officially formed, Teicholz attended a meeting with representatives from ConAgra, Grocery Manufacturers Association, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, among others, to talk about whether criticizing the guidelines from the scientific standpoint would, quote, create new opportunities for rewriting the recommendations. In other words, beef is back and butter is back. No, it's not. Butter is back fat. The British Medical Journal published some responses directly with the article. One of them was from the Center for Science and the Public Interest Nutrition Director, and she said that Teicholz criticizes the guidelines for ignoring a meta-analysis and 2 major reviews that fail to confirm the association between saturated fat and heart disease. Well, in fact, the systematic review to which she refers concluded that, quote, reducing saturated fat by reducing and/or modifying dietary fat reduces the risk of cardiovascular events by 14%, which was later changed up to 17%, and that the meta-analysis and second review, whose senior author has been heavily funded by the dairy industry, had serious flaws. And the moment I saw Nina, I was like, oh, here comes the Ansel Keys script. Yes, Ansel Keys was an evil nutritional researcher.
He was called a bully even by his friends.
And he ignored high saturated fat healthy countries like France in his 7-country study.
That's the 7-country study, where he went to 7 countries around the world, mainly in Europe, but also the US and Japan. He looked at their cholesterol, and then he waited to see who had a heart attack or who died of heart disease. For one, it's very clear that he cherry-picked his countries. He ignored other countries, also low rates of heart disease,
like Germany and Switzerland and France, where they ate a lot of saturated fats.
No, newer charts confirm what Ansel Keys originally said. Here's a chart of 40 studies, and death by heart disease is intimately connected with saturated fat consumption. Except you might notice the French did persist as an outlier. Well, from Dr. Greger of Nutrition Facts.
As Mary Nessel astutely pointed out, the French had just recently started eating so unhealthy, and chronic diseases takes decades to develop. I mean, the U.S. had been eating this way for 40 years, whereas the French had just picked it up. It's like if we all started smoking today and found no measurable increase in lung cancer tomorrow. It wouldn't mean smoking doesn't cause lung cancer, it just takes a while. It turns out French physicians underreport ischemic heart disease deaths on death certificates by as much as 20%.
In other words, there is no French paradox. Nina says that no studies conclusively link saturated fat to heart disease, and Nina even mentioned some of the metabolic ward-controlled feeding studies, but somehow missed this meta-analysis, which intimately connects saturated fat consumption and cholesterol. And to that, people might say, oh, well, high cholesterol doesn't even matter, and I have a whole video going to that in depth. But from the European Heart Journal, quote, there are strong, consistent, and graded relationships between saturated fat intake, blood cholesterol levels, and the mass occurrence of cardiovascular disease. studies, the relationships are accepted as causal. Causal, conclusively linked. And my all-time favorite, Nina's hellscape of a nutritional pyramid. Just flip the normal one upside down. We got grains on the top, fruits and veggies below that, and the base is fats and animal foods. Facepalm, major facepalm. Just put all the meat and dairy lobbying money on the bottom and build from there. And connected to this whole low-carb attack on the dietary guidelines, we have, from South Africa, Dr. Tim Noakes.
They advised the mother on Twitter to wean her child onto a low-carb, high-fat diet.
And I did a whole video on him recently, in depth, so you can check that out if you're more interested. One highlight, though, is that he criticizes industry-funded studies and then bases his whole nutritional view off industry-funded studies.
Here's the first study showing no significant evidence for concluding dietary saturated fat is associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease.
The exact study that Noakes mentioned was funded directly by the dairy industry.
You just have to follow the money.
Another important point is this meta-analysis showing that low-carb diets impair artery function, which is very important. We also have this study that put people on a more plant-based diet, and after a year, though, a bunch of them sort of defected and went on a low-carb diet, and then they had a control group, and they were able to compare their arteries. People on the more plant-based diet had a 20% artery clearing, and the low-carbers had a 40% increase in artery clogging, and here are their arteries. And perhaps the most important point of all of this is that a vegan diet has been clinically shown to rapidly unclog arteries and essentially stop heart attacks and strokes in their tracks. So in the hearing, when Noakes points to Finney's study of 10 people having some modest risk factor improvements, not gonna explain away all those other studies on how low-carb diets are not healthy. Sorry. But perhaps my favorite sequence in the whole documentary is the one with Lear Keith. I feel like I'm going through like some weird Twilight Zone dream of BS. Of course, she claims she used to be vegan, although she cheated all the time, and she wrote The Vegetarian Myth despite how...
I was never a vegetarian. I went from standard American diet, vegan.
One of her main points here is that you need to eat death to live, as she recalls gushing blood meal onto her garden as a stupid vegan.
Supply what the soil needs, and what the soil wants is dead plants and dead animals. And I can't take animals out of that equation.
Many of you probably know by now that you can grow things veganically or using stock-free methods. I have a whole video on that. We have large farms that do it, and we have small farms that do it. It is not that hard. She also puts forth a major appeal to nature fallacy that because certain animals eat bugs and other animals that you should be able to eat whatever you want. Since my duck eats slugs, I should be able to eat pigs.
You've never seen anything like a duck eat a slug. You want to see happiness? This is what I live for, was what my duck said.
I managed to get Lear's duck in for an interview. Yeah, everything that Lear says is logical, does not apply to humans, and she's a quack. She also comes up with what I call Lear's magic acre of land. She compares the super destructive monocropping to super magical pasture raising meat.
You take a piece of land and you clear every living thing off it. Now you're gonna grow an acre of corn or wheat. Now I'm gonna walk you through another scenario, which is you take the same acre of land, but you don't hurt it in any way. And in the meantime, you've got a ruminant. So you've produced the same amount of food for people. You've got the one ruminant at the end. You know, you slaughter her and now people can eat.
Same amount of food, really? Okay, math time, Lier. From the USDA figures, we have about 350,000 calories per acre per year from cattle grazing. Corn, 15 million calories per acre per year. That's over 40 times as much food per acre. Lear's really wrong. In the end, it's clear that the benefits shown in this movie are not from going into the state of ketosis. They're from massively dropping your consumption of processed foods and shifting to whole foods. And you obviously see a benefit from that, but you're also setting yourself up for the long-term damage of high animal fat consumption and artery clogging and so forth. I think a logical point that demonstrates that ketosis is not a healthy state to be in is by looking at the Inuits, who used to be the poster child of ketosis, but when they found out that they actually have a genetic adaptation to not go into ketosis, they stopped mentioning them. But think, why do they have that adaptation? It's because the Inuits who weren't going into ketosis had a higher chance of survival and passing on their genes, because ketosis is not a healthy state to be in. And another interesting point to mention, if you really, really feel like you need to go into ketosis for epilepsy or something like that, you don't have to eat a super high animal fat, super high saturated fat diet. You can do a vegan keto diet. I've seen quite a few people do it. It doesn't look like a super fun thing. I don't think any keto diet looks like a super fun thing. Perhaps basing your whole diet around plant foods might buffer some acidity a little bit more. There might be other benefits, but it still probably comes with some of the risks. I'm just being transparent here. But the good news is you don't even have to go into ketosis to get so many benefits like reversing diabetes and losing weight and unclogging arteries. That can all be accomplished with the whole food vegan diet. All right, this video is getting a bit long despite how there's so much more in the documentary that I would love to cover, but the main point here is that the documentary makes many outlandish, irresponsible health claims and completely ignores a mountain of data showing adverse effects on a keto diet. Look, I'm sorry if this documentary got your hopes up and made you think that a keto diet was the healthiest thing and a magic pill. It's just that processed foods are horrible and animal foods are still not healthy for you. They're still gonna clog your arteries. Okay, let me know down below if I missed any points or if I was wrong about anything. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.